Oh, that's so funny. Well, it's interesting. Today, we are in the middle of a series called Friendology, and it's funny. Every year, we give you kind of a chance to say, hey, here's some things that you'd be interested in us talking about, and adult relationships and friendships is one of the things that always bubbles up. And so last week, we kicked off this series. We talked about how it's like an interesting time to be an adult because of technology, because of relationships, and how these have evolved over the years. And it's so funny. Today, we're going to be kind of picking up where we left off. But we talked about last week that there's an interesting thing that's happened. And in a lot of ways, we're more connected than we've ever been. And we're also more isolated in some ways than we've ever been. So I put these up here. I think it's so fascinating. It's interesting. We can order anything right now without talking to anyone. How many of you have DoorDashed in the last month? Anybody DoorDashed in the last month? Yeah. I DoorDashed yesterday. I actually did the same thing. Yeah, I actually did too. I woke up late yesterday. We had like an event at our house, and I DoorDashed. Anybody guess? Chick-fil-A, yes, absolutely, Chick-fil-A. And so I got Chick-fil-A, and then I forgot that I dashed it, so it was just sitting there. So somebody that arrived at our house was like, hey, you did it. And I thought it was so funny. When I drive through like Chick-fil-A, I know everybody now, so I talk to them, right? And they hear my voice. It's kind of awkward. And so I'm like, hey, what's up, Steve? You know, we talk about it. And now we're at a place like I will end up having a conversation as I go through. If I DoorDash, this is so fascinating. The guy who DoorDashed my food doesn't have to speak to anybody when they go in. There's a shelf. They grab the food off the shelf. They put it in their car. They drive to my house. They don't even talk to me. They drop it off at my door and then they leave, and there is no human interaction with that. That is so fascinating. And as an introvert, I'm like, thank you, God. Take my money. And they do. They do. The other one is this. A lot of us, like, you can work without leaving the house. And this is kind of a shift in the last, probably 35, 40 years in particular. But you can work out of the house. It's allowed us to work out of the house. And then when we do, there's no really cubicle that you're involved in. Like, there's no 20 other people around. There's no water cooler conversation. Like, you're on Zoom or Skype or whatever it is that you use. Skype. You're not using Skype. That was back in the day. You remember Skype? That was fun. Never worked. But anyway, but you're on Zoom and you're doing these things and you realize maybe you're having conversations like that, but you can go through your entire day not having like a person-to-person human interaction. You can exercise in your living room with a virtual trainer. Where my Peloton people at? Yeah, me too. I signed up for it. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, but you can do that with a virtual trainer. This is always fun. You can date through an algorithm. I love, this is so fascinating. I used to, we were probably the last group of people that didn't use apps to date at all. So I met my wife in a library and I went up to her and I had a great pic. That's not true. She actually came up to me and I was nervous. So there was that whole thing. But you had interaction. Now it's very different. You don't even have to you could date somebody for a long time digitally before you ever even meet. That's a whole different thing. You can maintain friendships through likes and emojis, which is kind of true. How many of you are on a text thread where you just respond without words every once in a while? Anybody do this? You have a meme that you're involved in, but you're not super connected to it. Yeah, I do that too. And then you can build a following online without actually ever having to build a relationship with any of the people. And what it's done for us, which is so interesting and so fascinating, I'll tell you, I don't even think this is necessarily bad in and of itself. It's kind of where it can lead us. But what it's done is it's caused us to feel more and more and more independence. Now, independence is a fascinating idea because if you're a parent, you want your kids to be independent, specifically of you one day, right? We actually raise our kids to some form of independence. Some of you are wired this way. Like if you take a personality profile, you'll look at your personality profile and it will tell you in the middle of it that one of your biggest desires is independence. This is mine, right? I want to be independent. I want to feel like I'm in control. I want that sort of individualism, independent sort of thing, and we can move towards that. Now, what's interesting though, is that our independence, right, or pursuit of individualism and independence has produced consequences in our lives, right? This is how this works. Now, I'm naturally an introvert. A lot of you are probably naturally introverts. When you think about this, I enjoy this, and also it does have deep sort of consequences as we move through the course of our lives. I, on a great day, can go read a book for a couple of hours, hang out with my kids at night, disappear, go to bed. I don't need 600 friends. I need a few that I'll talk to every once in a while, and we'll get together, and it'll be deep. I feel that. Some of you are like this. And some of you are not wired that way, but you've just progressed to be more independent and individualistic in your life. Now, again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The problem is when you take it so far, and oftentimes we do, we find ourselves in a place where we don't actually have the depth of relationships as we should as adults. So what happens for a lot of people is you go and you're in high school, maybe you have friends in high school, You go to college, you have friends in college, and you have memories, and you have things that you forgot about because of the memories that you made. It gives them of that. You have all of these sorts of fun things that happen to you in college, and you walk out of college, and you had friendships there, and you come out of it, and you get into like 20s and mid-20s and 30s. Maybe you get married, and you have kids, and then all the responsibility begins to pile on. And as it begins to pile on, what you found is this: that you are more connected to your 3,000 or so Facebook friends. You have more people that you have accumulated over the years, and very few people that you actually have depth of relationship with. Now, I'll tell you where we're going. Now, if you're introverted, immediately what I would do as I start talking about this is I go, thank you so much. I know that he's going to tell me at the end of the sermon to have more friends. I don't want to. This is so great. It's time for me to go to sleep. You know what I mean? Like I get that. I feel that. So let me just tell you, if you're introverted like me, I get it. I would be thinking the same way, and track with me for a few minutes, right? If you're extroverted and you go, I know everybody, you have so many people, like your favorites list is like 2 pages long. Like it's like you got this sort of thing. But you know so many people, but you don't have like depth to it. What I want you to do is I want you to lean in too. And for those of you who are followers of Jesus, I'll tell you this in particular. What we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, I don't think is like a non-negotiable, because I think it's how you're wired. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, I would say this. What the overarching view of Scripture on this is extremely helpful, even if you're not a follower of Jesus yet. What we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is going to be extraordinarily practical, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. And I would say what we're going to talk about at the core of it really does make your life better and make you better at life when you lean into it. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is we're going to look at a passage of Scripture. It's in the Old Testament. It's about a guy named David. David's always interesting to talk about. The reason it's interesting to talk about is because we all have some view of David. And whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, you know the story of like big old giant guy. He's got a little slingshot. It wasn't a slingshot, but kind of throws it. Giant falls down. Like we all know that story. Most of us have some context to David in terms of being king and all these sorts of things. But the interesting thing about the story of David isn't just the highs that he has, but it's the depth of the lows that he's experienced. And when you read this, it actually is kind of Game of Thrones-ish, which I love. It actually feels like this over time. You have every version of what could happen when things go extremely bad for a person. And it goes extremely bad at least several times because of his own decision-making or lack of boundaries in his life. And so the context of what we're going to look at today, I'll say this. Most people have heard this story before. But when we get into it, you begin to discover that the actual thing that feels like it presents itself is what happened, but the problem actually is 4 or 5 layers behind the decisions that he made. And so when we look at an area of the Bible, it's in 2 Samuel, we're looking at chapter 11. The context of this is David had gone through the whole David and Goliath thing. He goes through a king who is jealous, who tries to kill him over and over again. David makes a lot of decisions that had a ton of character. He trusted God. He followed God in extraordinary ways, becomes king. And then over time, he almost like loosens his grip on what it looks like to have integrity and character in some of these things. But specifically, he does this around his relationships. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 11, here's what it says. Again, a lot of us have heard this story. We're going to go through some specific parts of it. It says in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, which feels kind of odd for us, but there's a season for this, right? When the kings typically go out to do what kings do to conquer more land, do that sort of thing. David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonites' army and laid siege to the city. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Now, we can talk about the war stuff for a long time. This is always a fascinating conversation. We won't today, but I'll say this. What he does is he neglects being not just with the people that he should be with at this sort of time period. He neglects being with his people. So what's fascinating about the story of David is he was not just the little kid with a slingshot. He was actually known as like this courageous warrior. So when he goes out, it's almost like throughout the narrative that we see, the place that he feels most comfortable and the people that he often feels the closest to a lot of times, as you see through the stories specifically with Saul, are some of these people who are going to war and doing these things. David stays back, and he stays back with a reason. All right, in fact, the original language here, we get the copies in Hebrew. The original language that talks about this is around choosing isolation intentionally. He doesn't just stay back. There's a deliberate separation from where he should be to where he actually is. Now, I will say this for many of us, right? This is a subtle thing that creeps into most every person that I've ever met. It creeps into their life during different seasons. And it is a subtle sort of decision around isolation, whether at a broad stroke or specific areas of our life. I put it in my notes, I said it this way, that isolation often begins very subtly with small decisions to remove ourselves from the responsibilities or relationships that actually keep us accountable. Now, this is one of those fascinating things where I go, you can go a long distance in this without anybody ever knowing. Have you ever had a friend where you were super close to them and then it felt like they slowly started to pull away, but it wasn't the friendship, it was the vulnerability that happened? Do you know what I'm saying? Like they stopped being appropriately vulnerable. They stopped being open. It almost felt like there were these little pieces of their lives that they just sort of closed up and they put aside. And here's what's so fascinating. The older that you get, the better you are oftentimes about doing this in a subtle way and distancing from people who can speak into your heart, speak into your life, speak into your marriage, speak into your friendship, speak into your business, all those kinds of things. And when you do this, right, and many of us have done this too, you come up with all of the reasons why you should, and it doesn't feel like a bad thing. Like, are you busy? Yeah. Did you go from like 2 kids to 3? Yeah. And is that harder? For sure. And are you drinking more coffee? Yeah. Like you're feeling those things. Like you feel the weight of these things and you feel yourself distancing and you go, what is that? And what you're doing is you might hold the friendship but create isolation within the friendship that once held you accountable. And can I just tell you something? Here's one of those things. Everybody does that. That's pretty normal for most of us. And usually we do it in subtle steps. But the more steps you take in that direction, and here's what's so fascinating, the more vulnerable you become to decisions that can cause you pain. And so David steps back and he isolates himself from where he probably should have been as king to be where he is. And then you get what comes next. And most of you kind of know what happens next. It's late one afternoon after his midday rest. And can we just say, that would be great just to have a midday rest. And you know what I'm talking about? Like, I want the fullness of whatever that is on a memory foam out. Anyway, midday rest, David gets out of bed and he's walking on the roof of the palace, right? He walks on the roof of the palace. And as he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath, right? Now, this is kind of one of those things where you just go like, you kind of can see where this is going, what's happening next, right? The original language here too, the image that it gives is a person who's walking around aimlessly, right? Now, I just gonna tell you that when you isolate, and especially when you're like disconnected from the relationships that you should be connected to, that is one of the most beautiful pictures of what this is, right? It's not just that he's not where he's supposed to be. It's that he almost doesn't even know what to do when he's not where he's supposed to be. And so he walks around aimlessly. Like, again, I'm a guy, I feel like I probably understand guys better. You ever met somebody who is extremely driven and then for whatever reason, life experience, pain, struggle, it's like they lose whatever that drive is. And they're still doing all the things, but they're doing the things without purpose. And when you come across them, and you don't even know how to talk about it a lot of times, but you'll see them and you'll go, it feels like something's lost. It feels like you're walking around aimlessly. And sometimes they'll say, I just feel a little bit lost. I don't even know what to do, right? I feel, and really the word for it is disorienting. You feel disoriented, and you don't feel disoriented for a day. You feel disoriented for a season of your life, and you're walking around aimlessly. And again, this is what's so fascinating. You know, you talk about the enemy, people like the devil, all these sorts of things, which I do. I think there's a personification of evil. I think that is true. But what happens for many people is that's often the door that gets cracked for the greatest amount of temptation to come in. Because you don't know what to do, and either you're numbing pain somehow, or you're finding yourself giving into desires that usually you're distracted from because you're living with purpose and living so well. And so you find David sort of walking around aimlessly, and they're suggesting, it's almost like he's wondering, what's he doing? He's wandering around on the roof and he just sees something that catches his eye, someone that catches his eye. And what's unique about this situation is it's almost his disconnection from where he should be in the relationships that he should be most connected to that leads to this, right? I put it in my notes to say it this way, that David's disconnection from his community led him to focus inwardly on his own desires, but also left him wide open to what was to come next. And so you have this moment where he's, my house doesn't have a roof that oversees the city, but you can sort of imagine when you do, and he sees her. Now, the other fascinating thing about this, I doubt this is the first time that he's on the roof, and my gut says it's not the first time that she ever bathed. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I hope. You know what I mean? So when you look out, I'm just telling you, when you look out, this is an experience that he's engaging with that likely wasn't even new. If he could see out, he could probably see out. And then what he does next, and this is the beautiful, fascinating, gut-wrenching, and dark part of the passage, is he has this unique confluence of having enough power, enough desire, and this is the interesting thing, likely enough reputation up to this point to all feed into what's going to come next, which is something that's really dark, right? It goes on, he says, so he sent someone to find out who she was. And he was told, she is Bathsheba. Now this is the interesting part of how it's even talked about. It's not just she is Bathsheba. The daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So can I just tell you something? Guys, you know this, right? You were single at one point, and there's a girl that you found was attractive, and your friend went over there, and she came back, it's like she was married, right? And this is what happens next. You go, thanks so much, moving on, right? He has a moment right here to go, you know what, probably shouldn't have been up there, probably shouldn't have been watching her bathe, probably shouldn't have been engaging this at all, probably should be where I'm supposed to be. Thanks for letting me know. That was a fleeting thing, I'm done, right? But what happens in this moment is, and I think this is one of the most interesting parts of the passage, the absence, right? The absence of accountability ultimately leads or will lead in some variation to the presence of some form of regret. So he sends someone to go find out, and he finds out all that he needs to find out. But because of where he is and what's happening and the space that he's in, and the power that he has, and all of the things that bring him to being even capable of doing what he's gonna do next. The writer goes on and says this, then David sent messengers to get her. And when she came to the palace, he slept with her. Now, we could spend an entire message talking about the power dynamics of what happens next, right? Was this like a consensual thing? It's likely not in the text. He brings her in and he sleeps with her. And then he experiences the fullness of the pain that comes from him going in a direction that many of us can look at now and go, well, yeah. Well, we can see how you were headed there. Like we can see what was happening. Who was around you? Now, what's fascinating about this story too is this isn't like, oh man, that just happens in the Bible. Do you know what I'm saying? Like this isn't like, man, back then, that's not applicable now. Some of you have a boss, and you know this, or you've had a boss at one point or another, where no one could speak into their heart or their life, and you watched it. You watched them go from here to here to here to, and for them, it was like, for some people, it was like, it felt like it happened overnight, but it didn't. It was a series of decision-making that led them to a place where they experienced that. Some of you know this, we put it in here, like a moral failure happened in your family, and you know this, and you look out and you go, man, that felt like it was an overnight thing. But you being the kid, you know this, it wasn't. You watched and watched and watched and watched. And then all of a sudden and then it was. And then you go, oh. And there was a lack of accountability. There was a lack of relationship. And what oftentimes people associate with this, and this is even in Christian circles, is like you need like an accountability partner, just one person to speak into every, and I think that's great. I think you should. I think that's super helpful. And also like for one person to carry the fullness of the weight of all of the areas of your life and to check in still requires you to be vulnerable and open. And not the kind of vulnerable that tells you like just a little bit or just enough, but the kind of stuff where it's open and broken enough to where you aren't hiding anything. Now, I don't think you have to share that all with one person. Maybe it's spread out amongst a group of people, but I would say this. When you find yourself isolated, you are not that many steps away from what David experienced. Not necessarily what he did, but what he experienced. And so what happens is you fast forward through all of this, and some of you know, it just begins to grow. The entire problem begins to grow and grow and grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what David ends up doing is it becomes more and more public and all these things begin to happen. He takes the husband of Bathsheba and he takes it even further, right? Several verses later, we see what happens next. It says, so he puts Uriah, or he tells the people to put Uriah at the front of the fighting, where the fighting is the fiercest, then withdraw from him so he'll be struck down and die. And that's exactly what happens. Which means the decision way back here to isolate without the accountability or speaking into, just continue to progress and progress and progress and progress. And then it gets to a point where it's not just one thing that happened. I don't miss this. It is a version of compounding consequences that continues to grow in a person's life. And it almost feels like a snowball that just grows and grows and grows and doesn't stop, and then it's done. And here's how I feel about this. Now, this is how my wiring is. Can I just be really honest? You're going to judge me, but we'll all judge me together, and it'll be a great thing. I almost always, because of the way that I'm wired, go, I would never do that. That's further than I would take it. And then, you know this, you meet somebody who's smarter than you. You meet somebody who's more talented than you. You meet somebody that you admire. You meet somebody whose kids love them and their wife loves them. Everything feels like it's good. You meet someone like that who over here had something that grew and grew and grew and grew. And this is the most, I think, the scariest part. Who was appropriately vulnerable on some of the things to convince people that they were vulnerable about it, but not vulnerable to the place where they had someone speaking into the fullness of their life. And almost says, and so what happens is whatever is here continued to grow and grow and grow. And it's because they chose either isolation from the relationships or isolation from the responsibility of holding accountability somewhere in their life. And all of a sudden, it created more and more risk that fell through. So let's pray. Thanks so much for coming today. We're glad you're here. Feels good. It just feels good. All right, let me say this way. Isolation, to some degree, amplifies the temptation and increases, it's unnecessary risk. It's unnecessary risk that you carry. I've met very few people. I have met a few, but I've met very few people who look out over the trajectory of their life and go, I want to blow that part of it up. I have met a few, but I've met very few of them who plan that. But I have met so many people who did not plan for it. And this is the overarching, where does faith come in? We'll talk about that. The overarching discipline of making sure they were protected, they did not do that thing. They did not do that thing. And so when you fast forward through what happens next, it's one of my favorite passages in all of the Old Testament. You see what comes next out of all of this, right? Chapter 11, 26 and 27 says this. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And after the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. And this is the thing that no one talks about these kinds of parts of the Bible anymore. But the thing David had done, can we say it together just so we can all feel bad about it together? Is that great? The thing that David had done, what? Displeased the Lord. This is so great. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're going, well, I mean, if there's not a God up there, who am I really displeasing? That would be a fun conversation to have. Well, at bare minimum, you're displeasing your future self for the consequences that your future self is experiencing because of the responsibilities that you lacked in your current self, right? It displeased the Lord. And this is one of those things where you go like, nobody talks about like the wrath of God. And at the same time, we experience oftentimes the consequences to our actions. Now, sometimes God removes them in extraordinary ways, and God always has the capacity and power to redeem those things. But he has not promised to remove the consequences to our choice of actions in those places. And this should simultaneously make you go, oh crap, and also, where am I? You know? What David did displeased the Lord, which feels like an obvious statement. But I would say, your actions may be hidden from other people. And this is where it feels a little bit like this. I understand that. But the truth is, like, our actions, even when hidden from other people, they're never hidden from God. And I would take it one step further, and this is the unsettling part. Not only are they not hidden from God, but the consequences aren't always removed from God either, or by God either, right? Which means this, that for people who are followers of Jesus, and I think it's true of all people, but specifically for people who are followers of Jesus, God has given us the gift of having free will to move throughout the world the way that he has called us to move. And then he gives us the decision-making power to move through that and protect yourself in the ways that you would protect yourself in almost every other area of your life. Like my gut says you're not driving around without car insurance. If you are, drive on the other side of the road from me. You know what I mean? But like, my gut says you're probably not. Why? You're kind of forced to do it, but also like, you know this. Now, I'll tell you why this matters so much, at least for me. And it took me a while to get here because, again, I am naturally introverted. I used to see friendships as like an emotional thing. Do you know what I mean? Like I used to see friendships as like this thing where I'm like, you want to have friends because your life will be better, you'll be happier. And look, we did this thing and now we have, you have friends. And I think you should have friends like that. We're going to talk about that in a second, you should. But I think even more than that, there is a protection when you have the kinds of friends that God has called you to have. Which means this, and I put in my notes to say this. I think interdependence and being interconnected is as important or more important than your pursuit of your own individuality, your own version of whatever that looks like. And the reason for this is this, that isolation, it does lead many of us at some point in our life to being fueled with irrationality and unhealthy behavior. The more isolated you find yourself, the more prone you are to experience this sort of unhealthy behavior and ultimately this irrationality in your own life because you can convince yourself of a lot of things. And so what comes next is this, and this is one of the parts of the scripture that you look at. It displeases the Lord, but then it goes even further. What happens next is actually painful. You have this moment between David and this prophet named Nathan. And what comes next is Nathan confronts him on it. And he confronts him, and when he does, and again, I think you should read this on your own. I think it's such a fascinating passage. It's like he takes the box that holds all of the hidden things, and he smashes the box where everything is revealed. And have you ever had that friend who said something that was super truthful to you, and then they just sit there and almost wait in the silence? You ever had one of these moments? Where somebody just called you on something or said something, and the only thing that was true about that moment fully was that everything they said was true. And in about a second and a half, you went from anger to sadness to shame to, well, you're terrible, like you're blaming them somehow, to denial, to trying to repackage all of it in your head to where you can come out looking okay or that it was a mistake. But at the end of it, what you actually find yourself with after all of that emotion moves through you is just sitting there in the fullness of that person just spoke truth to me. And there's nothing else left to really say except, I have sinned against the Lord. Now, when you think about this moment, this is just really honest. Nathan had seen a king who likely would not have taken this moment the same way. In fact, you actually read previously in the text where he doesn't. And David's response in this moment is brokenness and acknowledgement of what is. And then when you read the rest of the life of David, which I think I'm actually doing this right now. I'm reading through 1 and 2 Samuel. So I love it. I read through it probably once a year. You see like the highs and the lows, the parenting struggles, and then the usurping of authority and all sorts of betrayal. And he has more highs and more deep, deep lows, all this kind of stuff. But in the midst of this, you find a man whose initial response to this is brokenness in light of sin. And there's a part of me that wants to make it formulaic for most of us, which would be this. If you do X, Y, and Z, then you'll never experience this, Or if you just figured this thing out, this thing out, this thing out, then it'll just be that. Most sermons on friendship end up being that. But the truth is you're wired differently than everybody else. That your propensity for these things varies in all sorts of different ways. And your life stage is different than everybody else. What I wish that I could redirect your attention on is this. That your pursuit of the individualistic, independent, I'm on my own, I don't need other people, or I'm too busy I'm tired, I don't have time or space for it. All of that stuff. I wish I could just erase that from your head and say you were designed to be interconnected and interdependent on people who can protect you. I put it in here, I said it this way, that independence is never the opposite of weakness, right? Independence ends up being the illusion of strength and that I can do it by myself, but that is an illusion. True strength is actually found through chosen interdependence, right? So I had all these questions, right? I was gonna ask you 40 questions. So I'm just gonna give you a form pretty much before you left. I'm not gonna do that because I'm a good person and I want you to come back to our church. That'd be great. But I am gonna ask you a few. Now, you're not gonna say these out loud, so I'm just gonna tell you the real honest truth of this is you answer these as honestly as you want to because it's for you. But I'd say actually answering these questions will help you illuminate where you are at when it comes to these relationships. And to be fully transparent with you, as the guy who put these questions down on a big old wall, I answered 3 of these questions with a I don't know, which actually means no, or I don't have a great answer to, or I don't have a name for. And so I'm sitting here with you going, this is tough. Some of you have walked through I used to have it, but I don't have it. I felt that, right? Or I used to have it, but I don't trust them anymore. I've walked through that too, right? You've walked through, so it's okay wherever you are. What's not okay is not acknowledging where you are and moving forward in it, right? So here's a couple of the questions that we'll look at. Who can call you actually after 10 p.m.? And I should have put without guilt. Do you know what I'm saying? Without should I call him or not? Who can call you after 10 p.m.? The other one is who do you know that you can call after 10 p.m. and then be okay with it? You know what I mean? Who could you wake up? You're all asleep at 10, but anyway, that's fun. The other one is, when was the last time that someone challenged a decision you made? For all of you that are leaders in the room, I'll just tell you this, ready? One of the most convicting things I've ever heard. It was so good. They talked about celebrities who experience a ton of influence really fast. And typically the trajectory of those celebrities, and you know this, is to develop a close court of people who only say yes. That is the most dangerous thing. That's what, by the time they're 19, you're like, what happened? It's not like what happened. We know what happened. No one could say no. No one could challenge their decision. It's not like, I wonder what if. We know exactly what that is. So I'm just telling you, if you're a leader in the room and no one can challenge your decisions, right? Eventually you'll be surrounded by people who only say yes. And eventually you'll make decisions that you wish that you wouldn't have made, right? Who's the last person to tell you no? So this is a fun one for me. I took a personality profile, and the guy that I took it with, he was a guy that was he did a lot of leadership development in our church. And I told somebody one time, I'm an introvert and I'm an Enneagram 8. They're like, you're so nice. There's no way you're an Enneagram 8. And the guy literally was walking by as the person said it. This is so fun. And he goes, hey, you should tell him no sometime. And then he just kept walking. I was like, number one, you're fired. But number two, you know what I mean? I was like, but you know what I mean? And I was like, that's not true. Little bit true. There's a little bit of that, When was the last time someone told you no? When was the last time somebody felt comfortable enough to tell you no and that you were open enough to receive a no? Right? This is a hard one. Who do you know that prays for you by name that's not your mother? Right? Come on. Honestly, who knows enough about you to pray for things that you care about? Right? And the last one is this. This might have been more for me. Who do you have fun with? I have fun with my kids. I have fun with my wife. This is one for me that I go, where do I just go out and just have fun? Not even that a hobby, but where do I get to just celebrate? Where am I around people that I can brag a little bit and not be like, oh, they're judgy, that they're excited for something that's happening? Where do I go for that sort of thing? Right? So this is not a new thing. What we're going to talk about in terms of an application step, it'll be brief. Be super helpful. It's a reminder. So I'm gonna tell you, it's a reminder. If you've ever read anything by Stephen Covey, this is a part of this. There's all sorts of variations of this. I was told this very early on in leading people, and it's been the best thing that's guided me when it comes to relationships throughout. It's developing a personal board of directors. Right? Now, you could phrase this or call this whatever you want. People repackage this in so many different ways. But I would say when I look at my life and when it comes to relationships that I have, I literally think about people in some of these seats when it comes to our relationships. So here's what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the 3,000 Facebook friends that you have. I'm not talking about the high school friend that you hung out with. They're like, yeah, we're friends. You see them and you catch up. They're not involved in your life. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your inner circle of people that influence you and that you're influenced by. I think there's 3 sort of personality types or relationships that you need to have to protect yourself in this way, right? First one is this. This is the truth teller. This is the sort of Nathan person in your life. Who's a truth teller? Okay, I don't know how to say this well. That cares enough about you to say what is true, but doesn't need anything from you, right? Now, it took me a long time to figure this part out. I used to have truth tellers that surrounded me in my life that also needed something or were beneficial in some way in the relationship where and you can have those people, but those people aren't going to always give you the fullness of the truth. They're not. If they need something from you, this is not a coworker, right? This is not a coworker. This is not a spouse. This is not those people. Who's a truth teller that can actually just speak truth into your life? Some of these people you have to pay for, right? Like I pay for a therapist, right? That person gets money from me to do one thing, and that's to tell me the truth or to get me to say the truth. Do you know what I mean? Usually it's me talking for 45 minutes and them just going, yeah. And I always think like, are they just right? Are they playing tic-tac-toe? Because they knew ahead of time, you know what I mean? Like, and by the end of it, you go, this is if you're a leader. Are you ready? If you're a leader, this is the mentor in leadership who does not get affected at all by your success or not. They care because they care about you enough, but they are not losing sleep whether you apply the principle or not. They're just telling you the truth, right? Who is the truth teller in your life? Who's the person that checks in, but they don't need you, they don't need something from you, and they're not influenced by you in those ways, right? Now again, can you have people in your life that are truth tellers another way? Sure. Do you have friends that look at you and go, hey, things don't feel right, I don't know what it is? Sure, you need to have those. But you absolutely need to have a handful of people that tell you the truth that aren't connected really so deeply to you in those ways. The other one is a close friend. I had so many variations of how I would say this. This is the person that's in a similar life stage that you are, that has shared values, that will show up for you, that you can call at 10, and that has compatible vulnerability. And what I mean by that is they're gonna be appropriately vulnerable with you, you're gonna be appropriately vulnerable with them, it's gonna grow over time, it's gonna be a good thing, we see these relationships all throughout Scripture. It's a person who's a close friend. They're not somebody you see once a year, they're a close friend to that person. And then the one that I spent probably the majority of my life so far just not cultivating or even caring that I had or even realizing that they existed in my life are the encouragers, which in some ways is the opposite of the truth teller, right? And this, you need a small handful of people who believe in your potential, who celebrate your wins, and gives you perspective when you fail that helps you to see more clearly, right? You need a few encouragers. If you have the first two without an encourager, you're just gonna feel like crap all the time. There's just a little bit of that. If you don't have an encourager in your life, you're probably gonna have a lot less fun in your life. You know what I mean? Here's a little fun snapshot for the parents in the room that are empty nesters. I'll tell you this, right? When you're a parent, and again, I'm not an empty nester parent, that's very obvious, but I have an empty nester parent. And she transitioned to this, and it changed our whole relationship, right? My mom doesn't coach me unless I invite it. But I got a text from her at 6:15 this morning that says, sermon's gonna be great. I'm so proud of what you're doing. Oh my gosh, everything I do is the best thing in the whole world. She likes every Nouveau post. She comments. I'm like, you gotta stop commenting. You're the only one to comment, Mom. You can't be the first like, can't be the first comment. I know it was great. Thanks for liking my shirt. I got it at Target. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's so great. Stop. She's watching too. Hearts. Anyway, yeah. But I love that. And you go like, and I'll tell you, it used to annoy me in my early 20s. I was like, I don't need that. I want somebody to tell me the truth. And I realized everybody told me the truth. I had way more context and feedback and clarity I could ever do anything with. But I didn't have anybody like my mom going like, oh, it was so great. It wasn't. Yes, it was. It was so much better than you thought it was. Sometimes I wonder if she goes around and goes, oh, dear God, But I would just say, like, there's a piece of this, which is encouragement. Now, can I tell you something? You don't just need a parent to do that. If you're a parent, empty nester, I think you should do that. When they invite it, give them all the coaching. I invite her, and she's an entrepreneur. She's brilliant. I invite her into things all the time. But I would just say this. I would say she embraces encourager first. But you need a few friends that are like this. And when you find them, Pour into and invest in that. Like now, some of you too, and I'll say this, we'll talk about all three of these. Some of you need to become that for somebody. The truth is, most of us are one of these primarily to a small handful of people in our lives. You are the truth teller to somebody. You are a close friend to somebody, and most of us are an encourager to somebody. And generally, especially guys wired similarly to me, encourager is the one that I don't want to lean into because I don't want to appear soft. But I have a group of church planners in particular. And we're not so far along that I'm this expert church planner. I'm absolutely not. And they'll come to me every once in a while for advice. But I'm deciding it out the gate. I am going to primarily be an encourager to a group of people who are one or two steps behind us in the process. I texted a handful of guys the other night. It was like 10 o'clock. They're on the West Coast, so it doesn't count. But you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, dude, I listened to your talk. I thought it was phenomenal. It was such a great, and I listened to it. I loved it. I love it. Or, you know, I had a friend the other day, like he rebranded everything. It's so good. I was jealous. I was like, man, this is so great. You know, I'm not trying to give him feedback. I'm just trying to go, man, it was great. I have so many friends that are phenomenal dads. And I'll just send them like, dude, I saw you do this with your son the other day. I took notes. I did. I'm only interested in being an encourager until they come and ask for something else. So they don't have to give it, but I want to be an encourager first. Can I tell you, if you're not an encourager yet, you ready? When you embrace the encourager role, nobody talks about this. That's generally the person that at the end of their life, when they line up the people they want to thank, oftentimes it's the encouragers. They were there for me when I felt this sort of thing. I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. Encourage other people's kids. Encourage their family. Like, find a way to be an encourager. And find a way to get some encouragers in your life. Now I want to say this, one other caveat to this, and then we'll wrap up in a second. Super practical. I used to think this was one person for each, that all I needed was 3 friends. Yeah. And a very wise CEO of a really large company, I was sitting with him and we were talking over coffee and I was explaining, I was how I was trying to organize my life. And he told me this. He goes, you need a truth teller in your marriage. You need a truth teller in your finances. You need a truth teller when it comes to your leadership. You need a truth teller in all these things. Yeah, this is a hard one for me, and I didn't realize this at the time. He said, you need a truth teller for your story, because your story's jacked up, man. You know what I mean? He said it like that. I was like, you know what, screw you. But anyway, I'm just kidding. You need a truth teller for that part too. And you go, like, man, that's like 60 people. And I'm like, those people are going to come in and out, and they're going to move through, and you're going to need them at different times and at different degrees. But when I was 22, I needed a truth teller for my story to help me walk through and process my dad. Right? When I got married, I needed a truth teller to tell me what that looked like. I needed an encourager once we had Henry to tell me, hey, you grew up without a dad in the home, and also I think you're going to be a great dad. Right? You need a close friend. Right? I had a rough day the other day. It was really late at night. I was driving around, I was praying. I was like, who do I call right now? And I'll tell you, if you don't have an answer for that, where you know you're going to call them, you ready? And they go, dude, how you doing? Like, how are you actually doing? Where when you call and you start talking about sports and they know it's not about sports because the Braves aren't playing right now. You know what I mean? Like, a few days, but we're getting there. Anyway, pitchers and catchers next week. So I would just say, like, when you go into that, they know. And like, what are we talking about? What are we actually talking about? And some of you right now, and I get this, some of you are going, I have it, and it's great. Or I have a handful of those, and it's great. Some of you feel brokenhearted, and you're good at hiding it because you don't have it or you don't have any of them. There's actually not a name. And if that's you, let me just say this out the gate. I'm an introvert. This doesn't come natural to me. It never comes natural. This is like working out. It is a discipline. You just choose to build this, and you're building it. You're not like stumbling into a guy's night, right? And going, I'm going to walk out of there with 10 friends. No, you're going into guys' night going, all right, I'm going to meet 3 guys tonight. If I don't leave this, I'm going to meet 3 guys. And it's awkward in the beginning. It's going to be awkward. It's 50 guys are showing up. It's going to be a little bit awkward. But you show up and you go, hey, I'm going to meet them. I'm going to talk. And then you're going to ask a real question. They're going to answer it. And then all of a sudden, and then it's the most awkward thing for guys. It's like, hey, we should hang out sometime. You ask another guy for their number. You don't know how to do it. So we're going to do this as an entire church. just ask. You know what I mean? There's nothing else. Just bump it, whatever that is. Then it flies away thanks to Apple and Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. We're good with that. Just do what you got to do, and then you text them later. You're like, man, that sounds so stupid. We get it. No, you don't. You know what I mean? Like, just do the thing, and then all of a sudden you realize that when you look around, you're starting to go, this is the truth teller in my life. This is the friend. We've got time and experience. This is the friend. This is for sure the encourager, because I know I'm not good at golf. You just realize and you figure those things out. And let me just tell you, you build it the same way you build your business, the same way you build your family, the same way you built your finances. You built it intentionally. I'm going to say one last thing, and then we're going to wrap up, and we'll pick up here from next week. I'm going to say this. Some of you in the room, and I've been here at different points in my life. I'll say this. Some of you in the room, you go, that sounds so great. That's so good for everybody else, but I did that and I got burned. I did that and I got betrayed. I did that and it hurt. I did that and my threshold for pain I thought was larger than it was, but it's not. So most of your isolation is in response to the stupidity of someone else, right? You phrase it better than that, but that's what it is. Can I just be really honest with you, right? There's not a person in this room, my gut says, that hasn't been betrayed. There's not a person in this room who hasn't likely been hurt. Your story feels unique because it's unique to you, but it's not a unique circumstance. And I was thinking, like, how do I actually describe this? Because when it's relationships, it feels different. When I was probably 21. I had this, remember Ford Tauruses back in the day? I had a Ford Taurus. I was at a red light. I parked, and I was in Atlanta, and a truck. It was like an F-350. I'm learning about trucks right now, so it's a big one, powerful one. It rammed into the back of me, and it hurt my back. I made a noise that I didn't even know I could make. That was fun. And then my bumper was in the back seat. It was totaled, right? And I remember coming out of that super shook up, and I was okay. I was okay, but I got super shook up and skittish to drive, right? And then I got another car that I was like, if you bump me in this, that's your problem. You know what I'm saying? That was my next car. You know what I mean? It was a Honda Accord. Anyway, that's good. That was good. Yeah, but that's how I approached it. But I was skittish for like a year of driving, and even now, like. I don't swear a ton, but like if you cut me off and my kid's in the car, I take the Nuvo sticker off. So I'm kidding. But I look at this, I just say, like, I feel like I get a little skittish. But I'll just say this. I'm going to say, and I literally remember talking to a friend about this. I don't like driving. And I like to drive in general. I don't like driving right now. And I'll never forget that they're like, I get it, but one day it'll be easier than it is now. You just gotta get back out there and just start doing it. And I was like, that's so easy for you to say. And he's right. Like, what's the alternative? Uber? I love Uber driving. I was going like, I'm not gonna be broke my whole life doing that. We didn't have Uber back then. So I just say, like, for me, I just had to do it. And that's a cheesy example. It's different with friendships. Absolutely. And also, you just gotta do it. Will you get betrayed again? Probably. Will you get hurt again? Yeah, probably. But if you don't do this, if you fast forward to the end of your life, the other consequences, I think, and the unnecessary risk that you put yourself up are so much larger. So here's what we're going to do. It's not going to feel super spiritual. I totally know that, but this is how we're going to wrap up our time. I'm going to pray for you. Before I do, I'm going to ask you to pray for yourself. So if you would, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a second. Bow your hands. If what we talked about today, you're like, man, it kind of hit. It's not all of it, but like there's this one isolation gap I know I feel. And you have like clarity around that. Maybe it's an area of your life you've isolated or a relationship that you know you don't have in place, those kinds of things. Just think about that. If you find yourself with the betrayal stuff, literally next week, we're calling it frenemies. We're going to talk about this all next week. But I'd say, like, if the betrayal thing's holding you back, I'd love for you to focus on that for a second. Figure out what that is. Or if you go like, hey, I actually just feel lonely and disconnected in general. I want you to think about that. And then the last one, I wasn't going to say this one. the other one is you're just lazy when it comes to friendships and you're okay holding the unnecessary risk, I'd go, say that. I think that's great. I've been there. Say whatever that is. A simple prayer I'm going to ask you to pray is this. Father, help me to see the people that I need in my life, because they're likely there. Help me to see the people that I need in my life and give me the courage to build it. Help me to see the people that I need in my life and give me the courage to build it. Father, I really do. I think you have a plan for every person in this room. I think you love us so much. You care for us. I think you want what's best for us. And with that comes a free will to decide how we move through our lives. So Father, I pray with all the complexities around this, and it can feel oversimplified and all of that. God, I pray that today, at the bare minimum, that you'd help us to see the value and the need for this. And then help us practically to do what we need to do to build those relationships. God, whether that's, finding people that work, God, finding people here that are moving in the same direction as us when it comes to our life and where we're headed. Stepping out, I know I joked about guys like that, but that's a real thing. Stepping out and meeting people at something like that or going to a group, help us to do those things. God, I pray that you help us see the value in it and that you surround us with the people that we need and you would actually give us all the courage to take that step. And I ask that you would help us to find joy in it, help us to find protection with it, and God, that you would help us to become those people for the other people in our lives. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.